Welcome to the Catholic Cafe, where Catholic truth is served fresh daily. We've made you a reservation in the luxurious corner booth, so come on in and see what's on the menu today. Now, here's your host, Deacon Jeff Drzymski.
Greetings and welcome to the Catholic Cafe. I'm Deacon Jeff, sitting in the luxurious corner booth of the Catholic Cafe. And we got the band back together. We have Ziggy Rodriguez.
That's me.
And we have Thomas Patrick Dorian.
Yes, sir.
Which we all know to be the Venerable Tom.
Venerable Tom.
Venerable Tom is here. And we're excited. And I want to start this show off
with Sam's talk about his pants catching on fire firework.
No.
July the 4th. I listened to the show. It was awesome. I'm sorry I missed it.
Yeah.
But that's what jumped out at me was that. I've got to hear that story.
No.
Maybe off the air.
No. Yeah, that's not.
I was in elementary school at the time.
Yeah,
I'll
well,
give
this
you that hint.
Even
Well,
better.
I'll tell it in parts. That was the first part.
I will say that I'm just going to say that we don't like to do controversial things here, but I'm going to tell people out there,
Yeah.
I cannot stand the Sparkle Creed. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google Sparkle Creed. And it's like, this is the nutty stuff that shows up in the world that we have to we need to know our faith.
Yep.
We need to love Jesus. We need to love our church. And man, it's getting out there.
Yeah.
You know, and you think like things, and you watch it, and at first I was laughing. I shouldn't say, I don't want to be disrespectful to other people, but the reality is I was listening to the words going, this is kind of funny, you know? And then I started realizing but there are people that are actually praying this like every Sunday. So if you want to be edified, you know, because I was thinking about July the 4th and sparklers, and that made me think of the Sparkle Creed. So we're
My
not
fault. I got you off track.
we are not fans of the Sparkle Creed here at the Catholic Cafe. But I will say this: we're launching into a new little mini series. We've done mini series in the past, and so we're gonna do the 4 cardinal virtues. We've done the 3 theological virtues, and 4 + 3 = 7. You know, and a lot of times people make comparisons between like the 7 deadly sins and 7 godly virtues or whatever. It's an interesting concept, but we really want to do one on the 4 cardinal virtues. So we're going to launch into that, and we'll start with the 4 cardinal virtues. They're like, they come from Plato. I think was the first one to kind of started to talk about them.
I think Aristotle, actually.
No, Plato.
Oh.
Yeah. Why you doubt me?
On that, I thought
Yeah.
so, yeah.
No.
You had to go there.
No. It was in his Republic, Book 4. He brings up, but he doesn't call them cardinal virtues.
Okay.
He mentions these ways of living, right?
Oh, okay.
Right, and then Aristotle expounds upon them.
Sure.
And I don't know, because I'll be honest with you guys, I did not read the Republic. Well, Book 4. I didn't read Book 4, or 3, or 2, or 1. But I didn't read any of those things. So I don't know if he hinted at this concept, and then Aristotle kind of drove it home, made it famous.
Yeah.
Right. But it's really part of classical Greek philosophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Aristotelian, and Aristotle kind of went off on it and used it as a basis. And in fact, Aristotle's the one that says that possessing these 4 key virtues makes a person good, happy, and flourishing, right? They were always searching for these truths in life. But not only are the 4 cardinal virtues part of classical Greek philosophy, but they're really a major part of classical Catholic morality or moral theology, and always have been. And the 4 virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. We're going to cover each one of those in a different show.
Yes, and St. Thomas Aquinas, a lot of people don't realize that philosophy, people might listen to this show, especially those are separated brothers and sisters, and say why are they talking about ancient Greek philosophy? These are pagan philosophers. That just seems inappropriate to mix that up with Christian theology. And first of all, theology is developed by philosophical methods, right? And so Augustine he was a Platonist before he became a Catholic, and so Platonic philosophy was core to how he developed his theology. St. Thomas Aquinas drew upon Aristotle and his philosophical methods. But going up through today, when you look at Pope John Paul II, he drew heavily upon like Kant and various other like modern philosophers, right? And so for us to say, and like phenomenologists, etc., and so the relationship
That was a
between
Muppet song, wasn't it?
phenomenon.
No.
No, but the relationship between philosophy and theology is a long, storied, and nuanced one, right? But the fact of the matter is, the Catholic Church has adopted the four cardinal virtues through St. Thomas Aquinas, and it's deeply rooted in moral theology. And we'll explore why ultimately, because here's the thing we have to keep in mind about philosophy, and this is also relevant to St. Thomas Aquinas as well. Philosophy is seeking truth, right? And we believe as Catholics that truth, our minds, our reason was created to intellect the truth and receive the truth. And there's a lot that can be known without revelation, right? And so that St. Thomas Aquinas was actually an expert on that. He had natural law philosophy, was pushing the boundaries of how far can you take things just as a matter of reason before you need revelation. And he proved, for example, you can prove the 10 Commandments without revelation. You can just use reason. And so that basically by that proof that God, in giving the 10 Commandments to his chosen people, was basically restoring us to the natural law, that which was rationally cognizable. Anyhow, some things require revelation, right? But with regard to temperance, fortitude, justice, and prudence, Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas was drawing upon the same truth that Aristotle and Plato was drawing upon.
And also it's fair to say that there's a little bit of truth in all of the, in so many of the old ways. You'll look at some of the old religions that predated Christianity, certainly, but there are shadows of truth in some of these. They'll get things wrong,
right?
But then there are also shadows of truth, and when you start to realize that, like especially with philosophy, that some of these things that they were grappling with are the same things that we grapple with even still in a religious context. But I do a lot of my teaching, and I'll use this phrase, for a minute, let's take God out of the equation as I'm defining something. And the reason why I do that is because you can reason so many things. And ultimately, what you're going to end up doing is tying it back to natural law, and then tying all that back to God, the Creator, right?
Right.
But you start with, because a lot of people, you're approaching people, and they're not ready for like a God talk, right? They're not ready to go like, well, let me just tell me what your God says, and let me just see if I like that, right? Well, that's not a way to discuss, like especially when you're talking about sharing the gospel with somebody. It's fine to say Jesus loves you, but if a person is like rejecting anything that has the word Jesus in it, the name, well, they're not going to listen to you.
Right.
So how do you reach those kinds of folks, right? And so a lot of times I'll use that phrase, well, let's just take God out of the equation just for a second, right? But then I think you'll see why we need to put him back into the equation to get a fuller understanding of all this stuff.
Right.
So anyway, that's where I'm thankful that we have all these. Even I always liked Plato as a kid. I'm just pausing there.
We're with you.
Tom's with me
on
that one. Obviously, Sam never played with Plato.
No, I get it. That was cute.
just wasn't funny.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course, Aristotle. I love studying and realizing like, wait, I thought this was Christian moral theology, and it's like, oh, these guys are the basis. They started that way, and this idea of these. The word cardinal, reason why they're called cardinal virtues, comes from the Latin cardo, which means hinge. Like essentially the good, happy, flourishing life hinges on these virtues.
Well, and one thing also, so we did a series on faith, hope, and charity, the theological virtues, and we made a big deal about the fact that the theological virtues are not acquired virtues. And we unpacked that a whole lot. You'll have to listen to the last series regarding that. The main thing to say is the theological virtues, one of the ways you distinguish them from the cardinal virtues, in addition to the fact that they're not acquired virtues, is that their object is God. Faith, hope, and charity, it's all completely ordered towards God. It's about God, and it's 100% from God. Like you receive graces, and you have a capacity to receive grace, and the extent that you receive that grace is the extent that you have that virtue of faith, of hope, and charity. Whereas cardinal virtues, they first of all, like they are acquired virtues, and so what that means is like thinking like we use this example in our faith, hope, and charity discussion. It's like exercising a muscle makes a muscle stronger. Like if you're working at temperance, if you're working at fortitude, if you're working at justice, if you're working at prudence, ultimately this is about habits of the soul, right? And you can grow in good habits, but to be clear, the grace is still infused for these virtues, for the cardinal virtues, right? So if you're in a state of grace, the grace to grow in all the virtues is infused in you, right? And in fact, when you like walk out of the confessional and you're in a state of grace, all virtue is infused within you in that state of grace when you've been reconciled completely to God. But a person without grace can still grow in acquired virtue. And the other thing to say is that, you know, grace helps you grow in virtue, and it is only by grace that we can be perfected in virtue.
I want to go back because that's a big line. A person without grace can still grow in acquired virtues. Because you know, I don't want to make it sound like well, you mean like you can live a virtuous life without God?
No.
Well, ultimately the grace is, it's good to have grace.
Yes.
Right, and good to have these acquired virtues and to acquire these virtues. But the reality is, we have to look at the acquired virtues, the cardinal virtues, as muscles,
right,
that we're exercising and growing. And you can do a lot of exercise and growing. You can be a good person. That's why, you know, ultimately it gets controversial when you start talking about, like, can an atheist go to heaven? And the church, in her wisdom, sees this like, you can live a virtuous life and not know that you're living a Christian life.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a connection there, but at the end of the day, it is good to be Christian. It is good to be filled with grace, and it is good to acquire these virtues. So the more grace, more virtues, more grace, and to live in that environment is important.
Well, here's an example. So a sub virtue of temperance is fasting. Right? And we all know intermittent fasting is very popular these days. A lot of people who have no connection to their faith life, they are fasting and they're growing in the capacity to practice fasting.
That's right.
But they are getting better at it as they go. But the object isn't God, and they're not relying upon grace. Now, the people who are choosing to grow in the virtue of fasting, in the Catholic sense, they are going to rely upon grace, that the graces that are infused in them, and they're going to be doing it not for like their own, the health aspects, the bodily benefits. That is a byproduct, but it's ordered towards God. I'm fasting. I'm making a sacrifice of my desires for God. And so, if you're going to really be perfected in virtues, the virtues do need to be ordered towards God.
I will say this: it's easy for a person who, like, essentially is master of his domain. In other words, he's learned not to give
into his vices,
right? To fall into his desires, to give way to his bodily needs and desires, whether it's food or sex or power, whatever. It's like the person that even if he's not Christian, and he's learned to do that, once they start to understand, like when someone shares the gospel with them and they start to understand where those virtues are supposed to lead at the end of the day, and why, when they make us a better person and we receive the graces that even further inflames those virtues, they're ready at that point. Mm-hmm. Right? And you're right. You can fast and you can teach your body, like, well, I'm in control of my body. I can tell my body I don't need to eat, and it's good for me to, like, be hungry, and it's things like that. And you stop and think, it's like, man, can I just spend a few minutes with you now talk about Jesus?
Right.
Because you can see the connection more fully now that you understand that. Because a lot of people struggle with receiving the gospel, because they're enslaved to their desires, mm-hmm. right?
Well, and we need to get to that, because that's what temperance is all about.
That's right.
But before, one thing I want to clarify is, some of us in Radio Land might be asking ourselves, if the grace for all virtues is infused in me when I walk out of confession in a state of grace, then why do I struggle? Why am I not like, why doesn't it not just take one confession or our baptism where all of a sudden, boom, we're virtuous? And so there's two reasons. The big reason is because we have vices that need to get rooted out. Okay, so virtues and vices, they're both habits of the soul. Virtues are good habits. Vices are bad habits. So vices have to get rooted out. So the graces for the virtues are there and they're infused in us, but if we still have vices, if we still have bad habits, it's going to throw off our capacity to live a life of virtue.
And think about that for a second in terms of like what the church calls concupiscence, or this idea that essentially in our DNA there's a brokenness, right? So there is a tendency and a temptation always to water takes the path of least resistance, and when it comes to our humanity, we come from our nature is broken, right? But can be perfected, and the thing is, when we're in that situation, well, even though we might be in a state of grace, it's like, Lord, take me now.
Right.
I want to come out of confession, a good confession. I want to come out of that confession, and that's when I want to get hit by the bus. Like I step out of the confessional that's on the street, and as I step out, a bus hits me. It's like, boom, straight to heaven, right? But if I get 2 steps
past the bus,
and it's like, oh man, I just sinned again. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. But the point is, it's like you realize that like the temptation. The devil hates you more,
right?
when you go to confession,
sure,
and so works overtime trying to get you back into his camp,
right? And so he plays upon our vices, and to get us to do that. And so the acquired virtue not only requires us to work to root out the vices, but it also requires us to work at building up the good habits as well. And so going back to what an acquired virtue is all about, it does require effort. It does require work and intentionality. But we should probably start talking about temperance itself.
Since that's the show's supposed to be about temperance. So we had to do the intro stuff.
Right. So temperance is the virtue that controls our yearnings for pleasure and delights that attract the human heart.
There's some, if you go to good old Wikipedia, it's not always bad. It's pretty good sometimes.
Yeah.
And they basically tell us that temperance, other words for temperance, restraint, self-control, abstention, discretion, moderation. Right. Those are the kind of words that you might use. Basically, your temperance is like tamping down desire.
Well, when our appetites are out of control, our decision-making is going to be out of control. Right. So
I've never experienced that. Sam, what is that like?
This goes back to what we were saying before. Like, God is truth, and He created us to be ordered after truth. Like Jesus said, "I've consecrate them in the truth." Right. And so we seek truth through our reason. That's why we were given reason, and by that we're supposed to be subordinating our wills to reason. Right. And so. But if we have no temperance, then our appetites and our emotions and our impulses, they're all over the place, and so is our will. So how can we make a gift of our will to God if we can't control our own wills? And so that's why we need temperance.
And we need to build that muscle.
Yeah.
Right? We need to work on that because obviously everything gets clouded, and or at least our vision, understanding, and relationship with God. Essentially, we're building a wall, right? When is there intemperance? What is it called?
Immoderation or intemperance. Yeah.
And so it's like essentially, I love it when I make up a word that turns out to be a word. Yeah, so that's awesome. But the point is, it obscures our vision of God in our lives when we don't control, when we give over ourselves.
Right.
Like when we lose self-control. Then we that's why I used the phrase enslaved.
Yes.
We become enslaved to our own desires, and that's not a good thing.
And there's according to St. Thomas Aquinas, there's 2 sets of appetites that need to get moderated, right? There's the concupiscible appetites, which you made reference to earlier, but there's also the irascible appetites. So the concupiscible appetites, that's what we typically think of when we think of temperance, and that's pleasures, food, alcohol, things like that. But then irascible appetites, that's concerned with things like fear.
Give us an example of what you'd like an irascible appetite.
An irascible appetite, if you find yourself caught up in fear or caught up in anger or caught up in pride, those are all of those are examples of the irascible appetites getting the better of you.
Yeah. So for me, I'm just going to put down driving. I'm going to put driving down as part of my irascible appetite problem.
And so in both of those appetites, there's vices, right? And so, like, if we want to grow in virtue of temperance, like, we need to root out the vices that we have that are contrary to temperance. And so going to confession is a great way to do this, because that helps us get infused in those virtues. But we also have to work. We have to work for the virtue and be intentional about it, but also try to root out the vices. So maybe we can list off some vices that are contrary to temperance. And we got gluttony. This is not a full list, okay? But gluttony, drunkenness.
Tom is going to round out the list. He's going to fill in the ones you missed.
Right. But gluttony, drunkenness, lust, any related sins and vices, to lust as well, like pornography, anger, cruelty, pride, curiosity. Now that might be surprising to people that curiosity is listed, but what that means is if there's knowledge that's above your station, it's really none of your business, then whether it's the stuff about the private life of another, or you're caught up in, I wonder what's happening behind those closed doors, whatever it might be.
Or you use curiosity as an excuse.
Yes.
Because there's a part of you, like, without temperance, you're more willing to like, well, hey, I'm not really drawn to that, but I do want to see what it's about. I want to do a little research.
Right, exactly.
Right, and just see what this whole pornography thing is.
Yeah.
Right, so you type in something on the computer, next thing you know, you're inundated, but you probably should have known ahead of time what you were getting ready to get into.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Or
so curiosity killed the cat is the old expression.
Right. Well, gateway stuff, like if you are going on Google or in the news and you're seeing someone's telling the lurid sex details of someone's life, we have no business hearing about this affair. Honestly,
right,
and it's a vice if we start saying, "Oh, I want to read this. I want to
learn."
And that's
what
about this.
That's what media preys on.
Oh, they do.
The news media and stuff. They are really, really good at telling you all those sordid details, or acting like, well, we don't want to get into the sordid details about this particular thing, but here's what happened.
Right.
And everyone's going like, but I'm tuning in because I want to know the sordid details.
Well,
it's rubbernecking going past an accident on the road.
Yes.
There's a part of you that wants to. What happened?
It feels
did
entitled.
They die? Yeah. Well, it's just like you, and that you get curious, and all of a sudden you start to realize that you're losing control of yourself.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying that you're going to hell because you slowed down right at an accident to look to see, but the reality is we go too far with those kind of things sometimes, and it's not just about accidents; it's about anything in life.
Well, and another
look at that person over there and what they're wearing. That is ridiculous.
Yes.
Well, okay. Well, stop looking at them. Well, I can't now. Sorry.
Right.
And it's something where we need to exercise the temperance muscle.
Right. Check ourselves and ask: is this really my business? Am I going to be edified by this in a meaningful way? And then another thing is immodesty. Is a vice under temperance, and a lot of people just associate immodesty with how women dress. That's typically the first thing that comes to mind, and that's not all that is included in modesty questions, but it's really how a person manages their externals. So also just. Are we just presenting? How are we presenting ourselves? Are we presenting ourselves externally in a way that is well ordered? It can also relate to our decorum, our etiquette, right? And in addition to how we dress and how we carry ourselves, but that's moderating one's externals is actually what modesty is all about. And failure to do that, just being sloppy, and not caring how you look, that is also a part of immodesty. Not caring about your appearances in any way, that's also a vice of immodesty.
I made my bed this morning. I want everyone to know that. Is that bad? Did I told everybody? Did I just ruin it?
You're so funny. But so we have to. So I would say, pay attention to the various vices that we have to pay attention to the various vices that we might have, because we're all going to struggle with different parts of temperance, right? And then if we say we're going to root those things out, take them to confession, but also let's try and fast on those vices and say, man, this thing has control over me. I really need to work on rooting that out. And fasting is a great way to do it. And it can be fast specific to those vices, but also just general fasting as a practice can help you grow virtue
and
too.
That's why, again, Mother Church in her wisdom presents us with an opportunity every year to fast.
Right.
Or to abstain. And these are opportunities that we have. Right. Well, exactly right. But at least we all know about Lent.
Yeah.
Right. And the Lenten fast. But you're right, Tom. There's Ember Days. There's all kinds of different times in the year in which the church says, it's probably better if you don't go hog wild today. It's Friday, it's a mini Good Friday, and so you're right. So temperance is something that not everybody gets excited about. It's not. It's also not easy,
right?
Especially if you're pretty far down the road in, we'll just say, being used to it. So bad habits, when we don't know that they're bad, they probably are. I mean, we know when we have good habits because it bears good fruits, right? And so when we look in our life and when we're having problems or issues, you can start to realize I got some bad habits that I've just allowed to grow, and I need to work at. That's what I talk about mastering my domain. There's every once in a while I diet just because, right? And some of it's there's a side benefit of losing a little weight, but the reality is every once in a while I want to know that I can. I want to know that I still can control my appetite to that degree. And you know what? It's helpful to keep trying to do that, to work on that. And that works in so many levels. And so we're in the middle of these 4 cardinal virtues, the hinges that are going to make us good and happy and flourish, as Aristotle says, but also really that just bring us more in tune with Jesus Christ, what he did for us, and also what the church is helping us to do in our day-to-day lives. And so growing in these particular virtues, starting with temperance, is something that will make a big difference in your life. And trust me, you just have to watch television for about 5 minutes and realize that the world needs more temperance, right? We need a greater opportunity. And you know what? There's no better opportunity than having our mother help us along in the path to temperance and to tamp down some of these desires and temptations in life. Let's ask her to intercede. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and in the hour of our death. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Catholic Cafe. If you'd like to contact Deacon Jeff, send him an email at deaconjeff@thecatholiccafe.com. Visit us on the web at thecatholiccafe.com. You can also find us on iTunes or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Catholic Cafe is brought to you by the Order of Malta Federal Association. Join us again at the Catholic Cafe, serving up salvation one cup of coffee at a time.